Okay, story time. It was the late 1940s. World War II was over and the baby boom was booming. Optimism, consumerism, and the beginnings of rock and roll music were in the air. And the US Air Force had a problem. Their planes kept crashing and they couldn't figure out why. At the beginning, they thought it was a training issue, or a discipline issue, or a morale issue. Whatever the problem was, it had to have something to do with the pilots themselves, right? But one researcher, Lieutenant Gilbert Daniels, had the idea to look somewhere else, somewhere no one had looked before, inside the cockpit. At the time, cockpit seats were designed for the average pilot. The Air Force had taken thousands of measurements of height, arm length, torso length, hip width, and calculated the exact average for each dimension. You know, mean, median, and mode, unless you're like me and fell asleep in middle school math class. You're probably familiar with the idea of a mathematical average. And designers had built every cockpit based on that average pilot. Our friend Lieutenant Daniels had the savvy idea to remeasure over 4,000 Air Force pilots to see how many fit those average measurements. Ready? 0. Not a single pilot was within the average range on every measurement. All these pilots were being forced into cockpits designed for someone who didn't exist. So right around now, you're probably thinking, Macy, get to the point. You've been yapping about fighter jets for like 5 minutes, and we were promised a video about educational psychology. To that I say, fine, here it is. Classrooms have been doing this exact same thing for decades. We build lessons, assessment, and expectations all around the average learner. Someone who's average on tasks and skills like memory, language, reading, curiosity, all across the board. But this learner is a mathematical mirage. This learner's a figment of our calculator's imagination. As simply as I can put it, this learner does not exist. The Air Force stopped designing for the average pilot and rethought the cockpit altogether, creating adjustable seats and flexible controls. And the results? Air Force pilots stopped crashing so much. Great success. So the question is, how can we do what the Air Force did in our classrooms? The answer is UDL. Hi everyone, this is Study with Macy, and you guessed it, I'm Macy. Today's episode is called A Crash Course in Universal Design for Learning, or UDL if you're already on a nickname basis. Whether you're a teacher, an aspiring teacher, a psychology student, or just someone who ended up here by mistake and is too polite to leave, welcome. I started this YouTube channel during my undergrad degree at the University of Victoria on Lekwungen, Songhees, and Esquimalt territory, where I majored in psychology and minored in sociology. You might have come across some of my videos about child and adolescent mental health, or even my deep dive into the world of moral panics, although I highly doubt it considering I've yet to crack 50 subscribers. I was inspired by my personal heroes, John and Hank Green, whose videos got me through high school history and biology. That's also why I'm wearing these plastic blue light glasses, because they're kind of John and Hank Green core. I'm passionate about knowledge translation and breaking down barriers to the concepts that we cover in university level courses. That's actually the goal of my crash course videos and podcast episodes, to break down barriers to knowledge and package essential information in a way that's accessible. Spoiler alert, that's not the first time you're going to hear me say the words barriers or accessible in the next 6 or 7 minutes, so prepare to be sick of me. We're here to learn about UDL. Okay, UDL, Universal Design for Learning. It sounds fancy, but at its core, UDL is simple. It's all about breaking down barriers. Here's my definition. Okay, fine, I borrowed it from Cornell University. UDL is a teaching approach that applies the architectural concept of universal design to the diverse community of learners that we see in a classroom. It accommodates the needs and abilities of all learners by eliminating unnecessary barriers and developing a flexible classroom environment where students get multiple ways to learn and to demonstrate their learning. UDL is basically the opposite of the old one-size-fits-all model where teachers teach to the average student. Because, as anyone who's ever tried to buy a sweater at Brandy Melville knows, one size does not, in fact, fit all. UDL has 3 big principles. Number 1, multiple means of engagement. Get students interested and keep them engaged in different ways. Number 2, multiple means of representation. Give students different ways to take in the information. And finally, number 3, multiple means of action and expression. Give students different ways to show you what they know. We'll come back to those, but first, let's go to the thought bubble for a very quick history of UDL. UDL didn't actually start in education. It started with architecture. Back in the late 1980s and 90s, my king and architect Ronald Mace pushed for buildings that anyone could use without needing special accommodations. Think curb cuts, automatic doors, lever handles instead of those twisty knobs. Features originally meant to support people with disabilities ended up supporting everyone. Picture a ramp for a second. Carrying a suitcase? Pushing a stroller? Not feeling like conquering the stairs today? Ramps don't just help people in wheelchairs. They benefit all of us. And how much more efficient would it have been if the architect who designed that building made a ramp at the beginning, instead of making stairs and then trying to make it more accessible by adding a lift or another wheelchair-friendly entrance? This idea, the concept of designing spaces for the widest range of people, right from the start, became known as universal design. Fast forward a couple years, and educational psychologists David Rose and Ann Meyer were like, hold on a sec, what if classrooms worked like this too? What if instead of trying to fix students, we fix the whole design of the classroom? Just like Lieutenant Daniels in the cockpit. Combine that with the rise of the neurodiversity movement, which challenged the idea of there being one right way of thinking, behaving, learning, and experiencing the world around us. Seeing autism, ADHD, and dyslexia as natural and valuable differences rather than deficits. And we had the foundations for UDL as we know it today. Universal design is all about fitting the lesson to the students, rather than shoving students into a one-size-fits-all lesson. Curse you, Brandy Melville. Thanks, Thought Bubble. So, David Rose and Ann Meyer founded an organization called CAST. And CAST is like the blueprint, the gold standard, the Beyonce of universal design for learning. CAST publishes universal design for learning guidelines on their website, which is a phenomenal resource for teachers. Linked it in the description of this video. Basically, there are 3 core principles of UDL, and they all center around removing barriers by providing multiple ways for learners to experience the learning process. So here's how the rest of this video is going to go down. I'm going to describe a hypothetical classroom, a please don't try this at home kind of classroom. Then together, we're going to use the 3 principles of universal design to give it a UDL glow up. Welcome to my class. Sit down in your rows, please, and open your books to page 394. Today, I'm going to teach you about democracy by lecturing for an hour about Canadian politics. And no, Carlos, I can't turn the lights down. You need the bright fluorescent light so that you can see your paper as you sit still and take diligent notes. Okay, as you see, I've moved to this side of the screen, so now I am playing the role of Carlos. Oh man, I don't care about the government. This is boring. Why are we even studying this? The first principle of UDL is designing multiple means of engagement. How do we get students to want to learn? UDL would say that since all learners are diverse, we need to engage them in diverse ways. This means incorporating their interests into lessons. Yes, even if those interests are super annoying, like 6'7" or K-pop demon hunters, and give them choices. What if, instead of jumping right into Canadian politics, Miss M introduced the idea of democracy and voting by watching clips from an episode of Dancing with the Stars? Students could cast votes on who they wanted to win. And if they didn't pick Robert Irwin, they would get an F. Just kidding. Another way to get students engaged is to emphasize the relevance of what they're learning. Don't shy away from questions like, Miss M, when am I ever going to use this in the real world? Instead, have answers prepared so that you can justify the so what of everything you're teaching. Oh, and another aspect that goes along with student engagement is minimizing the distractions in the classroom. Whether that be harsh or overstimulating lights, or unnecessary noise. I don't know if I can turn the fan down in here anymore. The second principle of UDL is multiple means of representation. It's all about how teachers present information to the class. In our bad classroom, Miss M is lecturing at the class with a PowerPoint, and that's fine, but it can't be the only way she does it. She needs to give students different ways to access the content by representing it in different formats: visual, auditory, and hands-on. We all have different preferences. Me, I'm a huge fan of watching a video over reading a chunk of text, hence the YouTube channel. Also, don't just assume that students know what the words you're using mean. Clarify vocabulary and use lots of examples. And try whenever possible to activate prior knowledge, like, remember last term when we talked about... This helps students to make connections between what they know already and what we're talking about now. All right, class, it's time for your summative assessment on government. Write a 5-paragraph essay on democracy. No! The third and final principle of UDL is providing multiple means of action and expression. We have to provide students multiple avenues to show us what they know. And writing a 5-paragraph essay is so last year, or maybe last century, I don't know. Let students choose how they demonstrate their learning. Maybe it's a video or a podcast or a piece of art. Encourage and celebrate the use of assistive technologies like speech-to-text. Give every student a chance to shine by letting them show what they've learned in a way that aligns with their strengths. Well, that was pretty long-winded, but altogether, the 3 principles of UDL do one thing. They help teachers design barrier-free learning environments. We need to bake support right into the classroom rather than adding it in as an afterthought. Instead of saying, some students can't do this, how do we fix them? UDL asks, what is there in the learning environment that prevents students from thriving, and how can we tackle that? By providing multiple means of engagement, representation, and expression from the start, we give all learners equal opportunities to succeed. In other words, the UDL classroom doesn't squeeze students into a design that doesn't fit. Instead, the design flexes to fit them, just like those lovely adjustable Air Force cockpits. And that concludes today's episode of Study with Macy. I hope you all had fun learning about universal design for learning and that you'll consider planning for diversity as the default in your future classrooms. Thanks.